Okay, good morning. This is second call. Chiefs and proxies, please come into the Assembly Hall. We're going to get started. Thank you.
Good morning, elders, chiefs, delegates, guests, relatives. The elders met this morning. They requested that before we begin this morning's session, that we give a Thanksgiving offering. So I'm going to ask our host, Elder Peter, to come up and give us a Thanksgiving.
Abajomas, Shomas, Geshemanado. or she be again any indigo, but she can't do them. Big witch giza got don gum, big witch gizas, menua de big gizas, menua nanag. Big witch anak wadon, big witch mama wayaki, big witch nabi. Big witch zabin zaman, menua zibi wan, menua zagai ganin, menua gitches tag and nabi. Big witch metekok, menua metekon sak, menua mashkusi, menua waboganing. Big witch beneshak, menua wesnak, menua wakanak, menua gigon sak, menua menadon sak. Big witch wabanang noden, menua jawanang noden, menua ningabianang noden, menua gibedanang noden. Big witch and dana koji betchaganak, menua ni mama, menua nuigi magan, menua ni Johnny sak, menua najan sak, menua and dana koji betchaganak. Big witch kakanagego niniwak mena kwewak, menua kwizan sak. Menua in the way maganaduk, Oma nungum. Chimigwich, Gajimanado, Minupa Matswan, Chimigwich Ojibun Moyan, Chimigwich, the way gun, and one Nagmanan, Chimigwich, Gajimanado. In those few words that I know, I give thanks for everything in creation. And for all of us to be here, and for the drum, for our language. And as we sat in the circle this morning, I was pleasantly surprised to see my chief sitting there. And that gives me encouragement that we can remember who we are. And that we can move ahead and try to bring the back ahead with us, to try to relearn what our ancestors knew, and that we can draw upon that, what our ancestors knew, to help guide us through all this what is put upon us, because I firmly believe that the way ahead is to bring the back ahead, to bring what our ancestors knew ahead, because they lived here for thousands and thousands of years. Since we were put here, we lived without destroying the creation, without destroying ourselves. And so that's my firm belief, that we should try to reach back and find that wisdom and bring it to the present. The past and the present and the future, they're all connected. You can't separate them. You can try if you want, but you can't. So I encourage you all to come and sit in that circle next time. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to use your language, even if you only know one word. So with that in mind, I encourage you all to have a good day, to learn something new. Chimigwich.
Miigwech, Elder Schuler, thank you very much for your kind words this morning and setting us for a good day. Our last day of the assembly, we have some very exciting business that we're going to be going through for today. Some of it is updates. Later on this morning, we're expected to have Minister O'Regan. Seamus O'Regan visiting us. So when he does arrive, we'll accommodate his schedule so he can present to the chiefs. We may have some resolutions at the end of the day. Lunchtime, of course, it says that there'll be bag lunches available. So if we give good effort, maybe we can work through some of the breaks that we identified. It's been a long 2.5 days, 3 days that we've gone through, but we want to get our business done as well. So our first item on the agenda is a health update. I'm going to call upon Chief Elaine Johnson and Carmen Jones, Director of Health Program.
Good morning. Gawaskanokwe Dijnakas, Shikan Dodem, Ganabajing Dojaba. I acknowledge the Thanksgiving prayer, the drum, the Eagle staffs, and all of you here. I also acknowledge the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Credit, Six Nations, and the Haudenosaunee people. And I am the co-chair of the Chiefs Committee on Health, along with Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler. And I give regrets on behalf of Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler that he couldn't be here today. I am doing the presentation on the update on Bill 74, which is the Ontario provincial legislation. And I just wanted to let the leadership know that this legislation is moving very quickly. And so I'm going to give you the update and answer any questions that you may have. So I guess I control this. This one? This like this? This one? Okay. It's okay. Technology. So you have this in your flash drives, but the Bill 74 update. So what is Bill 74? And we're going to talk about the background, the status. We did a standing committee presentation to social policy and then any leadership considerations. So what is Bill 74? On February the 28th of this year, the Government of Canada introduced Bill 74, also called the People's Health Care Act. And this proposed legislation calls for the establishment of a new super agency to be referred to as Ontario Health, and in the elimination of the existing 14 local health integration networks, also known as the LHINs. Ontario Health will also absorb the functions of 6 key agencies, including Cancer Care Ontario, eHealth Ontario, the Trillium Gift of Life Network, Health Quality Ontario, Health Shared Services Ontario, and the Health Force Ontario Marketing and Recruitment Agency. First Nations were not engaged on the drafting of this legislation or how it can responsibly meet the necessary health outcomes, service delivery needs, or priorities of our respective communities, providers, or citizens. So the bottom line is, we were never consulted. The background and overview. Upon notification of Bill 74 proposed, the Chiefs of Ontario Health Secretariat developed and distributed a First Nations communique to First Nations leadership on March 4th of this year, which informed and promoted potential presentations to the upcoming Standing Committee on Social Policy. So I'm just going to let you know, as the chief in my community of Serpent River, I am the vice chair of our North Shore Tribal Council, and we have a health access center, an Aboriginal health access center. So this health access center notified us of this legislation, and so I contacted the Chiefs of Ontario and said we need to be doing our analysis of this legislation. So a legal review and opinion was developed by Nadjuan Law and was also commissioned and has been disseminated to First Nations leadership. Copies of these documents are available on your USB. So the current status. Our Ontario Regional Chief received a letter from the Provincial Health Minister, Minister Elliott, on February the 26th, confirming the province's ongoing commitment to established agreements with First Nations in the province with respect to First Nations health transformation and requirements. Quote from Minister Elliott's letter, "In particular, I am writing to confirm my ministry, and I will continue to work with First Nations communities through dedicated trilateral processes and relationship agreements, existing agreements issued to transform First Nations health." So my understanding, and Regional Chief got a phone call from Minister Elliott the day before the legislation was introduced. And I understand that Regional Chief did voice her displeasure that this was the first time that she had been notified by the Ministry of Health. And she's nodding her consent that that's what happened. So Bill 74 received second reading on March 21st and on March 29th. And an invite was extended to the Chiefs of Ontario to present to the Standing Committee on Social Policy for April 2nd. So that was last week. And so the staff contacted me last weekend. It was a very quick turnaround time to present to the Standing Committee. And my understanding that there was well over 100 presentations that were put forward to the Standing Committee, but they only received 30 to present. So of those 30, there was 2 First Nations presentations. It was ourselves of the Chiefs of Ontario, and also Anishinaabe Nation, Ovid Mercury had presented. For the 2-day hearings, as was mentioned, there were 1,400 requests. So there was a lot of interest at this Standing Committee, so I did present on April the 2nd. Key items and issues that were highlighted in our presentation. Lack of First Nations engagement on the consultation on Bill 74 development is not acceptable. Agenda moving forward cannot be pan-Indigenous. First Nations hold distinct inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights. First Nations need to be appropriately represented on both the Indigenous Health Council and the Premier's Health Council oversight bodies. And this is in the legislation, and it was something similar to the LHINs, if you recall, a number of years back. But we had asked for a First Nations Health Council, and the previous government did not allow that to happen. Established First Nations government and leadership processes must be respected, particularly as it relates to what the determination of our government representation will be. We also said our First Nations are all unique. Government relationships need to abide by these principles. So this presentation is in your USB. And I'm going to say, as the presenter on behalf of the Chiefs of Ontario, as I said, there was only 2 presentations, myself and Ovid Mercury for Anishinaabe Nation. It was a very short presentation, only 7 minutes, and then we were allowed 7 minutes of questions. So my understanding, and as I said, there were only 30 presentations that were presented. So I guess what I also need to share with you that is not on here is that because, as I said, I am the vice chair of the North Shore Tribal Council and we belong to a community health access center, is that my community health access center has notified us that there's only going to be 30 Ontario health teams in the province, and they are people or organizations, hospitals. What the province wants is integration. So they're talking about hospitals, public health, any health agency to form Ontario health teams. And so right now what they are doing is that there are groups out there that are saying we need to get on to develop a health team because there's only going to be 30 in the province. So they are now going to be reaching out to you, the First Nations, to say, do you want to be on board? And I know that there have been conference calls with different groups in Ontario. Minister Elliott has been having these conference calls with different groups. And so what they've been asked to do, and I can share this because my tribal council did share this with us, is that these groups are being asked to look at a self-assessment form. They're being asked to look at a jurisdictional scan on selected integrated care systems. And they have the guidance for healthcare providers and organizations on Ontario health teams. So I just wanted to read you a particular section of the guide. And it says here, and it's telling providers, in particular, Ontario health teams must demonstrate that they respect the role of Indigenous peoples and Francophones in the planning, design, delivery, and evaluation of services for these communities. Furthermore, Ontario health teams must demonstrate that they are able to provide culturally safe care for Indigenous peoples in their proposed population. This could be achieved through partnership with Indigenous governed organizations, especially where these organizations are providing integrated care to their community. In the case of First Nations communities on reserve, where a prospective team is proposing to be responsible for a region or geography that includes one or more First Nations communities, endorsement from those communities is required. So this, we were advised, as I said, within our tribal council, it's going out to our leadership as we speak, that this is happening. So we've given guidance to our Health Access Centre to start to look at becoming an Ontario Health team. So that's only in our area. And so what's going to happen is that there's probably going to be groups that are going to be reaching out to you. We did put a phone call in this week to the senior person within the Ministry of Health, Patrick Discerny, to ask about these Ontario health teams, and he said he couldn't meet with us to talk about this. He's going to talk to us next week because I was wanting clarification on these Ontario health teams so that I could report back to the Chiefs in Assembly. So he can't do it today because the budget is coming out today, and he said that all of his time is spent was in preparation for the budget and also to be in the lockup today. So unfortunately, I couldn't give you more details in regards to these Ontario health teams. So as you can tell, this is moving quickly. We have not been consulted. There's only these provisions within the legislation that talks about us as First Nations and Indigenous people. And so it's really how we're going to respond in regards to this legislation as it's moving forward. So I guess that's as much as I can share at this point in regards to the legislation. So I'll be open to any questions, comments, or concerns.
Which, Chief Johnson, is there any questions, or comments, or concerns? Second call. Microphone number 4.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Chief Malhardy, Bijouab Exagini Quebec. Yeah, this is very concerning. We've been speaking about this from in our area. And the concern is that the lack of consultation. And the other concern is, I think the bigger concern is it's almost like we're talking to a mini Trump here. Because this guy, as far as I'm concerned, what we're seeing and hearing is consultation is not big on his agenda. And other than having to put our concerns on a paper or setting out a big protest, and from the chiefs having to have a statement, concerning about the fact that we're losing the customs and our traditional ways of even when we deal with in healthcare with our people. And even we had those LHINs, even though I felt those LHINs were a problem, at least they were a mechanism that we were involved in. and then we felt at least we had a foot in the door. And this really is concerning because it takes away even our voice to have a brown face and to be translated into our language and our customs. So I just want to put that on. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Chief, microphone number 2, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Brissett, the proxy for Fort William First Nation. What I'm concerned about, I guess, is we always are hearing the same thing, like I said before. They always tell us, no, you're not getting it, we're doing this, we're doing that, and we remain silent. The Canadian public don't know we're being treated like we are. We don't say anything publicly about this, don't bring it to the attention, and we've gotten a lot of support from the public lately when our issues are raised. But there's got to be an education behind it, and I think that's where we've got to talk about going back to the treaty principle. We never gave this land up like Canada keeps insisting. And you hear them run around in their playground, oh, Indian giver. You give me something, oh, you want it back. We never gave them anything. And we always allow them to get away with saying that statement, this is our land. It's not their land. But, you know, when we just take this and let it happen, people think, well, we give up. And we deserve to lose what we have. We don't even rise up to raise voice to anything. I think the lesson we learned in the past, the Idle No More group, I told the chiefs at that meeting, pretty soon our young people are going to get tired of us not telling them what's going on and not involving them, and they're going to take matters to their own hands. And that's what they did. I think it's going to turn the same way if we keep coming to these meetings and being told no and going home. Well, they wouldn't give it to us, so we give up. I mean, what the heck good is that? What hope do we give our people and leaders when the leader comes home and says, I got beat up, I can't get you nothing? That's no word to come and bring our people. It's a word we should be saying. It's time for us to start raising noise about this all across this province. Those high school students themselves walked out of class when they disagreed with Mr. Ford. They didn't let him shove them around. And what are we going to do? The same thing? I think we should shut the bloody highways down and everything and tell them we're done talking. I mean, that's what they want. They want us to push us to this area. Mr. Ford thinks we're squashed. He can walk right over us and rub his feet on us. We're the owners of this country, and that's how we're treated. It's a sad state when we accept that from this government, that we'll let this happen. So I tell you, something's going to have to give sooner or later. We can't get pushed any more than we're being pushed right now. We push back, gain some yardage, and we lose miles just by going to meetings and meeting with them. And we should be insisting they come and meet with us in front of our people. Let them tell our people, no, we're not going to help you. See what they'll hear from our members. They'll hear a lot more than we'll be nice to them saying. But Mr. Chairman, why don't we take a position against this government? We knew we were going to run into this going into this. You can't be friends with conservatives. When they want their way, they're going to push you out of the way. If you're costing them money, that's what they're saying. They want your money, folks. Don't make me give it to them. That's their cry. Who owns this place anyway? It don't feel like we do, and yet we do. What a message we give our youth. The confused leaders of the First Nations of Canada don't know if they own a country or not. So, Mr. Chairman, let's make a strong statement or something. Let's not just take this lying down. that seems to be what we're doing lately, laying down every time they tell us no. Before we were shutting the borders down, we were fighting, now we're giving up. Anyway, think about that. Thank you.
Miigwech, Tom. Thank you very much. Microphone number 3 and microphone number 4.
Bonjour, Maridok Yaguji Yajik and Dishnaka. Mary Duckworth, Caldwell First Nation Chief. Thank you for the presentation, Chief. Where I have issue is this. We never get consulted, so we always have to push our way in the best way we can, being kind to get those meetings. So we do that. So we had a LIN in our area. And what we did was we were able to have Indigenous representation on that LIN. Then we created an Elders Council with the LIN. Then we had the LIN have to take all the training to be culturally competent. We had a good partnership. We started to do work. They started to fund us for Indigenous healing. We were moving somewhere, and then all of a sudden, the LINs are gone. That relationship is gone, and we have to start over, and we're not even being engaged to start over. So when the superpowers get set up, and I can say that where we lose is when they make these big super agencies, we get lost in them. Because we are the lowest priority, and we know that. So what I believe we have to do is push for the representation on all 30, not just one. We need representation on all 30 so that we have a voice, so that we can start over again to build a relationship. So the relationship, everything is built on relationship. That's how I see it, and that relationship still isn't there. I'm willing to do the work to have a relationship, but I can't get to the table. And I think that's where we fall down. So I'm hoping we have some good ideas. I don't like to come with problems. I like to come with a problem and a suggestion. But I don't know what to do because I haven't been engaged in this process in our community. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Microphone number 4, please.
Good morning. Phyllis Williams, Chief of Curve Lake. I'd like to recognize the sacred items in our circle here and give credit to our elders in the room and acknowledge the land where we meet. First off, I'll say Chimigwech to Chief Johnson for all the efforts you have made to get our voice out there and all those who have assisted thus far. We too had a First Nations advisory circle under the LINS regime. And I have to say that LINS was not the perfect mechanisms to address our concerns in our First Nations, but at least it was something. We were getting somewhere in that people were being educated about us and some of the struggles and challenges that we had in our First Nations. The day the announcement came up that they were going to dismantle the LINs, to their surprise, we were actually having a meeting at the time, and the staff were quite surprised at the announcement, so even they didn't get the advance notice. Curve Lake has a good relationship with the local hospital. In fact, I meet with them about 3 times a year to bring points of concerns and issues to them. I meet with the top CEO, and he's quite a good listener, and they will address any of the concerns that we have at the hospital. They are funded by the province, so just to remind that. I also am part of the board of directors with the local public health, and you know, we have relationships. We have worked hard to build those relationships in the local area. And I think that if we're going to do anything, we need to make it known with those agencies that do work with us. just like Tom has been saying, we need to get our voice out there, and we need to be very public about it and let those agencies know where we are and how this province has not consulted with us. The other point I want to make and make known as a reminder, you know, we're going to be bombarded with the theme of we're open for business. Well, let's be reminded, we're part of Ontario. We're citizens of Ontario. Nobody has talked to us about that point. And yet, the Ford government is going to say we're open for business. This is our land. And just like Tom says, we need to be part of it. So that's my vent. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Microphone number 4, then number 1.
Greetings to everyone here and to our ancestors and sacred items. Chief Johnson, thank you for the presentation and for appearing before the committee on April the 2nd. I would ask first of all, the regional chief to write a letter to the Premier and Christine Elliott to request a meeting with both of them to get the relationship back to what it should be, that they talk to us first, and that we need to have a separate meeting on this whole proposal and how the First Nations people in Ontario will be looked after in this process. I would like more information about what is the criteria to place these 30 teams that are going to be come into being, and I would like to ask Carmen and Tracy if they would gather more information on what is the criteria for how this decision is going to be made and inform the chiefs. But also, I don't think we should be left reacting to what they're doing. We should be taking forward a proposal on how we see it working to meet the needs of our people. If we become integrated, where our needs are going to get lost in the shuffle, there'll be competition about where the resources are going to land. And right now, the province of Ontario is pushing integration with the First Nations as well as the Métis communities. Some of them are just self-declared. So we see that happening in our area. And so I think there's a lot of caution to be had in establishing those kinds of relationship in boards where, you know, the First Nation gets outvoted on those types of boards that affect delivery of services for mental health and other health care, primary care, and so on. So we're developing one in our community, and that's what's happening there. The hospitals are in competition for some of these health teams. But I guess the criticism of the government is that the wait times in hospitals weren't reduced, that actually was making it more complicated to get care for persons. And let's not lose sight of the fact that the whole purpose of the Ontario government is to cut down on expenses. And so we don't want to get lost in the shuffle as a cost-saving measure for the government to delay addressing our issues. We know that we have the worst health demographics of any of the population in Ontario, so I would dust off those statistics and put that in your letter, Regional Chief, and request a meeting. Now, when Elaine Johnson and I went to the $1,250 dinner, conservative fundraising dinner, of course, compliments of a former national chief, Phil Fontaine, we had reservations about what we decided in the end we should go anyway. So there was a picture-taking opportunity, so I thought it would be a good idea to talk to Premier Ford, where he's standing. He says, "Oh, we support the First Nations. We want to work with you." That's what he said to me. So we're taking him up on it. So have that meeting with him, ask him to request that meeting, and invite the Chiefs Committee on Health to go with you. But there has to be a separate but I would ask the health coordination team to and Tracy and yourself to put forward, Elaine, a proposal on how we see it working better, and maybe there should be one in the north, maybe one up around Sulako, maybe one in the south. But I think population is going to be a consideration where these teams are going to be allocated, and it'll affect the allocation of resources too. So I think we need to do more than just react to it, meet, and see if we can develop a proposal that will meet the needs of our people. Yamako.
Chief. Microphone number 1, please.
Bonjour. Gabe nanganine dijna kazna mendu tem. Shkusib nizi bing donji. Ginap shko andene magnan. Dugi Ma Kaminan, Petag Dunigija. My name is Glenn Archie. I'm from Big Grassy River First Nation. I'm the proxy for our chief. Um, my name translates to the man from the west, and my clan is the Sturgeon. I think I wanted to say quite a few things, but the speakers ahead of me already covered that, and I just wanted to, I guess, kind of reiterate what they had to say in regards to how federal government and the provincial government treats First Nations. Back in 2003, I sat on the health committee in our community, and also our tribal council, and also at the Treaty 3 level. And at the Treaty 3 level, I participated in the Chiefs of Ontario Health Committee as well too, where we met Health Canada on a regular basis. And the problem there we encountered with Health Canada is that, you know, they brought predetermined issues already to the table. You know, issues that we were discussing, they were already determined by the time we got there. And we kept telling them, you know, please don't decide this. We need to talk with you with this. You know, we need to decide together. But, you know, it always falls on deaf ears. The decision was already, you know, made when they brought it to the table. No matter how much we asserted, we didn't beg, we asserted. You know, we have those rights. We have that right to be informed. So, and the stuff we did in Big Grassy, you know, to get the government's attention. As I mentioned before, I'm a land claim negotiator since 1995. And I was first elected on council back in 1995 as well too. And at that time, you know, our land claims were going on 20 years already, you know, without any government doing anything about it. So we got elected that time, and I was 28 years old that time, and learning of the facts of what was happening on the land claim. You know, I went house to house to each, you know, every member I spoke with. What do we do here? What do you want us to do? So the majority of the comments, or I should say all, most, you know, they wanted us to blockade the highway, get Ontario's attention, federal government. So we did that the next day. You know, we blockaded the highway, and we sure got the province's attention. They came to the table right away to negotiate, and subsequently 2 land claims were settled after that. You know, so you know what? So it shows we have to be kind of militant to get our way, I guess. And I agree with Tom Brissett there. You know, we need to inform the public on what the government is doing to us. You know, we try to involve the former mayor in our area as well to, I guess, to know, be a part of the discussion that's going on land claims. But then the Ontario government, federal government came with, what do you call that? He couldn't share that information with his people. So he got a thing slapped on him. So, which defeated the purpose of inviting him to the meeting in the first place. You know, so they deal very crookedly. And what I wanna see is, you know, we do some pre-planning as well too. We're always reactionary to the government's whatever they want to do to us. You know, the program's health. We're always reactionary. I may be wrong in this, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody, but I just came back onto council 2 months ago, and I'm starting to get into the issues again. But over the past, you know, decades, that's what was happening to us First Nations. That's what I see. So I support many of the speakers that had some ideas, you know, to move forward. So with that, I'll conclude. Miigwech.
Miigwech, microphone number 3, please.
Thank you. Chief Leo Matat Waban, Fort Albany First Nation. And I'm a treaty holder, 1905, 1929, treaty number 9. And like I stated before, as long as the sun shines, as long as the grass grows, as long as the river flows, as long as the wind blows, it's our treaty right. And we like to uphold that for the future generation. At this time, I want to invite our friend Ovid to address this C-74 on behalf of NAN. Thank you.
Miigwech Ovid for coming to the mic. Just want, with respect to your presentation, it's not going to be a half-an-hour presentation. Just wanted to make sure it's distinct for the information you're going to share with the Assembly.
Thank you very much.
Miigwech, National Chief.
Kayasa Yemiatak. It's been a while since I spoke to the chiefs in Ontario. I want you to know I'm working right now with the Nishnawbe on a very important initiative of self-determination on health. It's called Health Transformation. And it's a tripartite process that involves the federal government and the previous Liberal government and more in Ontario, and more recently the current government sent us a letter saying that they will respect the existing processes and mechanisms that we have in NAN territory. But as I said to the chiefs, that's not the legislation, that's not what the legislation is going to do. That's just a letter from a minister making a promise that the new system that they're going to develop has to consult our people down the road. I would say a little late in the process. Maaga, kuwesputa mamintinenta makina no anisinwag. Egata pagisan nakaosime. But we have to be very mindful as indigenous people so that we don't fall down anymore. And what we have here is not our vision for health for our people. This is an attempt by a government to streamline the existing process, to reorganize the existing process, the existing health system that's not serving our people well. So reorganizing the system is not the answer that our people are looking for. They want better services in their community. Not only that, but they want those services operating under our governments, not the provincial government and not the federal government. And the process that we have for health transformation, the Charter of Relationship document that was signed by the respective governments, makes a commitment to the chiefs in Northern Ontario and the people in their respective communities that the treaty right to health will be respected, and that the self-determination of our people to govern their own health care programs will be the basis for the future for health services in Northern Ontario. And now what we have here is a vision by the Ford government. And what is that going to do on the ground? What guarantee will our people have that the gaps in services will be fulfilled? There is no guarantee. What guarantee is there that the provincial government is going to now engage in giving capital expenditures for infrastructure and reserves? There is no guarantee. So our people deserve better. And health transformation will eventually get there. But now what we have here is a bilateral process, a top-heavy system for providing services to our people. And we know right now, from our own consultations with the communities, that racism is a factor in these hospitals, that our people are being discriminated against by nurses and doctors and institutions. And why would you now turn around and agree that these same institutions should become the Ontario health teams? That is, to me, unconscionable. we would be making a serious mistake to cooperate with this legislation. Maaga, pakan po tayo sa ginawa piya kay. Tagiskisya ki inawa kinana, tandew siya, eupigya. We have to remember our origins. Where do we come from? We have to remember these basic things about our identity. This plan by the Ford government is a 1969 white paper policy for assimilation. That's all it is. And there will be no assurance whatsoever that any of these health teams and that super agency is going to respect the treaty right to health. Absolutely none. So I'm here as an employee talking like a politician because I have no other way of talking. This is who I am, and I don't apologize for that. And at one time, as you remember, those of you who are young enough or maybe old enough to remember, one of my responsibilities was to warn our people, to warn our leaders when danger is coming. And I'm telling you, this bill is danger that is coming. Because when it rolls out completely, it will not be our people creating these health authorities. It'll be these white towns, these municipalities, these hospitals, these healthcare providers running the system. And we will be just there to receive those services which are inadequate, those services that many of our people experience at the end of discrimination. So transformation, health transformation, is the only solution for us. It cannot be the Ford formula for health in the government of Ontario. And look at it this way. All these chiefs here, they have programs that they run. Most of those programs are federally funded programs. But there are occasions when the province contributed to the health of our people, and we do have some health programs that are funded by the province, but that is not the norm. That is not the norm. The province has never stepped in, never stepped up to deal with dialysis problems in our communities, or diabetes, to provide dialysis to our people. They've never stepped up to come to our assistance when it comes to suicides in our communities. And where are they when it comes to drug addiction in our communities? They're not to be seen. And the plan that they have will entrench that insensitive system on our people. We can't take it. It will not work for us. From time to time, we have to stand up as leaders for our people. This is the time. This is another one of those times. Now, what's going to happen? This is my prediction. I'm not a prophet, but this is my prediction. Right now, as I stand right here, I am certain that people in Timmins are organizing. The white people in Timmins are organizing. How are they going to fit into that legislation? And they're probably saying, how am I going to fit in the Indians? How will they fit into our plan? Or maybe we should recruit one of those chiefs to help us. Or maybe one of the technicians to come and tell us. But it will not be our system. It'll be the system designed by the people in Timmins, or the people designed by the people in Thunder Bay, or the people designed by the people in Sudbury. Our self-determination will not be visible in the health teams that are going to be developed. It'll be primarily white people. And running everything for us. It shouldn't look like that. Our wellness, our life should not look like that. To be subjected again to the authoritarian values of a province implemented through the authoritarian values of a hospital or a white team of consultants. I'm using very blank language here to make my point. And it may not be seen as kind, but I want you to know one thing. If that system rolls out the way it's being designed by the Ford government, it's not going to be kind to our people. It will not be. They talk about providing us a seamless service. How can a broken system provide a seamless service to our people? Muna tunugan. It'll not be visible. Now, there may be some progress that we made with respect to health authorities, for example, like WAHA or SLIFNA. We may have these health authorities that are providing great help to our people, but they're not going to be the primary leaders under this bill. They will not be. They might be recruited to be part of the primary care, the health teams, but they won't be leading it. This is a danger. This is a time, anak, ugimawak. It's a time for us to say more than we need someone in the Premier's Council. We need to say more than we need our own advisory body for First Nations. No, that's not the answer here. If the Ford plan gets implemented, 10 years from now, everything will be under provincial jurisdiction and authority when it comes to meeting any of the services for our people. And the money that we do receive from the federal government, yes, the Ford plan can't impact that, I know that. But here's the question. We have to recruit the federal government to stand between us and the Ford government. They have a duty to protect our treaties. And they have to come to us to support us, to make sure that whatever is done in terms of health services for our people, it's under our control, not under some provincial bureaucrat or some official of a new health team that's going to be established throughout Ontario. All these health teams that are going to emerge. Can you imagine that? There will not be a First Nations health team. And even if we did to develop a First Nations health team, we would not be able to provide the full scale of services to our people because those services are not under our control right now. And this new system would further remove that potential for control from us. So I conclude with this. Mr. Chairman, you were right that I shouldn't speak for half an hour. Yeah, so I'll conclude with this. People are dying because the services are inadequate, because facilities are inadequate, because the duty of care of physicians and nurses is not always fulfilled adequately. Our people are dying because of the system. And the Ford government is just entrenching the same system. It's not changing it, it's just giving the power of that system to the regional people, like the people in Geraldton, a hospital that our people are avoiding, or the people in Timmins, where people complain about being mistreated, or in Thunder Bay, where people are being mistreated and complaining about racism, and so on. Asa, get the same I'm getting old now. Sometimes I forget. I had an important idea to tell you, but I forgot it. I'm standing here to try to remember it. And I know I've spoken 15 minutes already,
Yes.
but give me 5 seconds. I'll find it somewhere in my brain. I'll look at my staff and they'll tell me. Yumaga, what I'm thinking is this. The chiefs here in Ontario, they have to adopt a policy of non-cooperation on this legislation. And then they have to be in solidarity, in complete solidarity, that they're going to create their own health system for our people, the best one possible in this country, and that they're going to do it together in collaboration, creating the kind of system our people deserve. Because right now, old people are coming to white centers for medical attention, and our people are dying in hospitals when they should be dying at home. Clearly, the system is broken, you see? So we have to stand up. We have to stand up to protect the people's right to a better health. And I apologize to the chiefs from NAN, but they made a mistake in hiring me because they hired a politician, not a technician. But I'm sure they appreciate my comments because what I'm saying to you, I'll already relay to them in our own internal meetings. In Askamit now, I thank you.
Miigwech, Ovid, it's always good to hear passionate speeches. You carry a good heart. We want to thank you for your service as National Chief and for all your leadership over the last years. So, Miigwech, we'll have 2 more speakers at microphone number 4.
Miigwech, Ogama Nebanagojing Guyakusid Nakaz, Miigwech Gima Mercury. Just in regards to our discussion regarding health to further what the National Chief was talking about, I too have real grave concerns about the relationship with the province. And I would support the rejection and the essence of non-cooperation in a resolution. And I'm understanding that there is a resolution that's being drafted for some clarity for the regional chief to take action upon. I'm hoping that there would be, if some of our technicians can get that together, because we're not here very long today. But as I think about it, I think we need to, as precursors, as whereases, we need to make reference to our inherent responsibilities and our obligations to look after our people as nations, as the government of these lands, the first order of government. And as I think about and take inventory in my own mind, we have that inherent responsibility and obligation to look after the health needs of our people. Nowhere in our history does it say that's the responsibility of the province or the federal government. We have that primary responsibility. And our obligation and right to look after ourselves doesn't come from UNDRIP. It doesn't come from the TRC recommendations. It doesn't come from Canada's Constitution. It comes from us. It comes from the Creator. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to incorporate into the resolution, who we are and how we still have those memories of who we are. I am concerned about our people not being able to get the quality that we need, as we deserve as the original peoples of these lands. And we pay a big price with sharing our lands to make sure we have a proper system in place. And one of the things that I say at home as well is that if it's about us and for us, we need to be able to provide permission or consent. And I steer away from consent and sometimes when I'm talking, because I don't want that aligned with UNDRIP, because under UNDRIP, I think it's clause 46, gives the state the ability to override our consent in the best interest of the state. So I'm not really aligned with consent. I think they need our permission if it's about us. And we need to do whatever we need to do in order to make sure that our permission is respected. So I'm looking forward to a really strongly worded resolution that the regional chief feels comfortable in taking action on, that she has the support of all of us. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Final speaker, mic number 4, please.
This issue is really important to me because over my lifetime, I've been able to work with people who are needing supports like traditional healing practices. Whenever there's legislation or anything, it keeps bothering me that when our healers and our medicine people go into the hospitals, we still have to hide some of the things we need to do. Sometimes we have to make sure there's no nurses coming around and we can practice some of those practices that we always had. This is really important to the healing of anybody that wants to practice our traditional methods of healing, and it gets omitted in a lot of the stuff that we talk about. I know very well when somebody needs just to have a smudge at a hospital, sometimes they have to shut everything down and create, avenues to make that happen. Sometimes they get denied doing that. I really find it appalling that we have to hide some of our traditional practices at these modern medical facilities, and it bothers me that our healers can't do the things that they are gifted to do, because if they were caught doing them, they'd probably get kicked out of the hospital. I find that very, very awful in today's world, because I've seen things at hospitals where the patient recovered because of traditional healing practices, and if we don't address that within our future health opportunities, then we're missing a whole lot of opportunity to save lives. And I've been working with McMaster University in their first-year medical student program and trying to introduce them some of these methods so that new doctors can finally see, some of our methods and maybe even draw to them when it's necessary. And so I think we need to build that into any type of going forward with the health plan that we have, is don't forget about our healers and our medicine people, because they're the most crucial part of a healing in a life and death situation. And I don't ever want to get that lost within any type of legislation. So, let's please give thanks to those people who are gifted that way and to have an opportunity for saving lives. In my nation, we're struggling for men to stay alive past 60 years old. And we need to start doing these things, because this is what makes our people strive to be elders and to build a relationship with new generation as they grow and teach us as we move forward as nations. So I just wanted to share that with you, because it always gets omitted in our discussion. Those healers are strong people and need to be addressed. So just wanted to share that with this conversation. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. And apologize to Mike 1 that was the last speaker. They'd called it for last speaker. So apologize for that to Chief Beardy. I'll ask Chief Elaine Johnson for closing remarks, followed by Ontario Regional Chief Archibald. And if there's a question that you can attend to Chief Beardy, please.
How, Miigwech. I appreciate all the comments and suggestions. Miigwech to everyone that got up and spoke. And I'm a nurse by profession, and I have worked up in the north, and I've worked up in the south. And so I do appreciate many of the issues that were brought forward in regards to health in our communities. I know, we're always talking, and I appreciate the previous comment in regards to traditional healing services. We're talking about health and healing. We need to look at our language, our culture, land-based programming, our traditional healers. And the non-First Nation people don't understand that part. And so I do appreciate the thoughts and comments, and also to Obed Mercredi, the National Chief. I worked under him as health in AFN when he was the National Chief, and he still speaks very powerfully, so I appreciate his comments. I also appreciate the comments in regards to this Ford government. They talk about economic certainty in this province, and they're not going to have economic certainty with us First Nations people. We have treaties in this land. We are the original peoples of this land. So we do need to give a strong message to this government. So I understand that there was no resolution planned, but we are going to work on a late resolution to take in all your comments to move forward. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and appreciate everybody's comments this morning. And so I'll ask Regional Chief to make her comments.
Miigwech Elaine, I'm very grateful for you and Grand Chief Fiddler and the work that you do on this file. And I know especially the last minute call, Chief Johnson, for you to go to the legislature. We're very grateful. So just to back up to the call I had with Minister Elliott, on that call I made it clear, number one, this was not consultation, so that conversation was not a consultative call. I made that clear to her. And when she started to say, can I tell you about the legislation, I said, no, you can't, because number one, you can't call me the day before. This is not what partnership is, calling the day before you're going to release some legislation. I asked her to work in partnership with us, we were willing to do that. And so I said, you know, let's move forward on that basis. And so that's basically, I wanted to summarize the call that I did have with her. And thank you, former National Chief Ovid. Where are you? Where is he? Is he still in the room? Anyway, I really appreciate his words, and I heard very clearly we need two things: a resolution, which we're doing, and a letter from me to the Premier to ensure that the resolution that is passed here is respected, and it's very clear that it's a rejection of the legislation. It's a non-cooperative, we are not going to cooperate with this legislation, and we'll have some recommendations. One of the things that really I heard mentioned a couple of times is dignity. I heard how this system doesn't always treat our people with dignity, and so that has to be within our strategy moving forward, that it is about allowing our elders to die with dignity, because eventually we all do go home, and so that's important. But while we are alive, we ask that we also be treated with dignity within this system. So we will proceed on that basis, and I thank you all for your comments throughout this meeting. I always record what you're saying, chiefs. I'm always making notes when I'm in the room so that I'm aware and can circle back to some of the things that you're saying as we move forward. So miigwech for your comments.
Again, miigwech, Chief Johnson and Carmen, for the health update. We're now going to move on to the next agenda item. It's early learning childcare. And portfolio holder, Grand Chief Joel Abram. The other committee members are Ruby Miller, Glenda Rastool, and Marilyn Lumsden.
All right, before we ask for the presentation, yesterday we had a couple resolutions that we weren't able to bring to the floor, and we now have movers and seconders for them. And the first one, well, actually, it's more for probably going to be some kind of debate, I figure. So, but we do have movers and seconders, so we can allow for that process to happen. And it's on immediate relief funding to do with child welfare. So I believe the movers and seconders aren't in the room. Chief Pelletier and Chief Paul there as well. Okay, so I'm wondering if we can bring that up on the screen. So hopefully this won't take too long. If it does, then we'll see. Okay, there we go. A quorum is 28? Okay. Oh, okay, sorry.
So just to make sure we have quorum, we want to do a quick count. So if we can get our chiefs to proxies to stand up quickly so you can do a fast count. We have a counter. It looks like there's 28 there. Okay, we're good.
There's way over 28 there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Just by looking at the visual, it's obvious we have more than 28 chiefs in the room, so that's fine. All right, so Resolution 1219, Federal Child Welfare Prevention Funding 2019-2020. Mover Ogama Duke Pelletier. Is that you there? Yeah. And Chief Arnold Paul. Oh, sorry. I really think I got to go get my eyes checked. I can't even read the screens. All right. This is a complicated resolution in terms of the formulas that were set out and the numbers that are listed here in the whereas clauses. Do you want me to go through the whereas clauses, or have you all reviewed the resolution? You want me to read the whole resolution? No? Okay. Therefore, be it resolved that we, the Chiefs in Assembly, 1, direct Indigenous Services Canada to distribute the following 3 pots of prevention funding. A, 2019-2020 immediate relief prevention funding in the amount of $15.9 million. Dollar sign missing from that one. B, 2019 to 2020 ramp up immediate relief funding in the amount of $6.38 million. C, 2019-2020 Community Wellbeing and Jurisdiction Initiative funding in the amount of $17.6 million. Directly to all 133 First Nations in Ontario via the Ontario First Nations Limited Partnership funding formula, which is 50% total population, 40% base amount, and 10% remoteness factor, as an interim funding formula without prejudice to other processes. 2, direct the Chiefs of Ontario to advocate for First Nations Child and Family Services funding that is needs-based and recognizes the needs of all Ontario First Nations, such as remoteness, high children populations, capital and infrastructure needs, programs and services accessibility, high-risk factors, and other considerations. Do the mover and seconder wish to speak to the resolution? Microphone 1.
Good morning. Gima Duke Pelletier, Wipkampong, Cedar Territory. Just want to reiterate that the existing formula that's being proposed here under the number 1 is something that's been used for the last number of years. Last year there was an additional top-up of 15% to consider the concerns of larger First Nations as well as remote First Nations. However, that funding pot does not exist to cover off that additional amount that was considered for last year. So the only existing formula that is available to us in this instance is the OFNLP 50-40-10 formula. And this is being recommended for the purposes of ensuring that these funds come out this fiscal year in a timely manner. Because of the impending activities that are happening at the federal level, and we all know what those fiscal cycles are. when elections do take place, we may not be seeing any of these funds until February of 2020. And that's the indication that we're receiving from the federal government if there is no formula developed and approved at this point. They have indicated to our staff that the June timelines of our annual assembly may be too late to actually have funds go out the door. So this is being recommended as an interim measure again. There is work that is taking place to ensure that an appropriate formula is developed, and I believe that the Ontario Special Study will take into account many of those different factors that have been brought up at their last few assemblies over the last couple of years. And the update that we received yesterday, or Tuesday, sorry, is that that work is continuing and that a report will be coming forward shortly and for your consideration at the June assembly. So the work is taking place to have a more appropriate formula. The concerns have been registered by all the technicians that represent all the PTOs, and this is the interim measure that should be considered by all within an assembly. So I'm looking for your support to pass this resolution to ensure that the prevention funding gets flowing immediately. Miigwech.
Okay. Does the seconder wish to speak to the resolution? No? Okay. So what we're hearing is this is a stopgap measure, a temporary implementation of the old formula so that the funding doesn't get held up. Microphone 4.
Chief Elaine Johnson, Serpent River First Nation. Just a question for clarification. So this does not affect our existing funding. It's a ramp up, correct? And then I understand it's an interim funding formula as we work out our formula. So when we say interim, until when? Do we have any idea what target we're aiming for?
The hope is by next fiscal year, something more permanent and agreed to will be in place, based on needs, yes. Any further discussion on the resolution?
Wait to the mic, sir.
Microphone 4, please.
We passed a resolution in our assembly some time ago about this, to do exactly that with past year's funding, but some reason or other, the resolution wasn't implemented. And so I want to know if we pass this resolution today, this is going to be honored by the Chiefs of Ontario, because that isn't what happened with the other one.
Do you want to answer that? Okay. Chiefs of Ontario will undertake its best efforts to implement the resolution. Any further? Oh, microphone 1.
Good morning, Jason Batiste, Proxy, Matagami First Nation. At the NAN caucus a couple nights ago, the remoteness quotient study that they've been undertaking for the last number of years was released to the chiefs. And it's a fairly complicated piece of work that takes in a bunch of factors about what it costs to do business in the north. And it's actually, even for myself, who is not in the remote north, at least the communities that I work for, we're more in the urban Timmins neck of the woods. But it's very revealing to me about, the cost of doing business there. And what it does is it actually explains better why the money needs to flow in an extra bunch to those communities. And I'm convinced that needs to happen. And one of the things that was really telling was the number of young children they have. I saw one community of 4,000 that had 2,000 kids under the age of 19 in the remote north. So what I promised Chief Alvin Fiddler to do was promote not the remoteness quotient study, because I think people need to digest it, have a chance to look through it and make your own minds up around what you think needs to happen with it. But what I suggested is maybe we could do it, a continuation of the formula that was arrived at in November, which is the 50, 40, 10 plus 15. So on behalf of the NAN communities, I would put forward that suggestion to the floor if there's an appetite for that. Miigwech.
So we've had a request to add a plus 15 factor to this amount, and I'm seeing heads shaking no. Do the mover and seconder wish to address that issue? The mover does. Microphone 1.
Well, not necessarily to address it. I thought I did mention that there was no existing extra 15% amount that we could rely on to have a top-up, because my community was also one of the benefactors of the 15% top-up. However, in this instance, there's no funds that exist to have an additional top-up. So unless there's a suggestion on where this other 15% will come from, then I don't think we can entertain that option. As I said, this is an interim funding formula that also provides a direction that a more permanent formula needs to be developed, and that needs to get expedited. And I think that the work that NAN has done with the remoteness quotient study, as well as the Ontario Special Study, will provide the direction to the chiefs on a recommended formula going into the future. Miigwech.
I'm wondering if, to address the concerns raised by the NAN representative, to add a paragraph to the draft resolution to indicate that Chiefs of Ontario would be directed to advocate or lobby to find the funds for the additional 15% for the top-up. Yeah. I'm hearing from staff that concern would result in holding up the release of these funds. Question's been called.
I was at the mic. Sorry, Tom.
Yes. Nice. Okay. All right. Here, I heard question, but Chief Miracle is right. He was at the mic before he called question. So microphone 4, and I understand Regional Chief wants to say something as well.
I can't recall, but I wanted just clarity on this. Joel, has all of the 2018-19 money gone out to the communities, or is it still in the hands of the government? It's gone out. Okay, thank you.
So the funding has been released. Regional Chief asked to speak, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One of the things that happened is November we did have that resolution that was supposed to be 15% on top, and then the government actually didn't find the 15% on top. And to me, the middle way is for us to continue to advocate for that 15% for remote and larger communities, but not to hold up the existing fund, so that the funds be distributed based on this resolution. So all of those monies that are identified in this resolution, we disperse them, and then we take it upon ourselves and our committee to advocate for that additional 15%, and if we find that, then we distribute that to the remotes and larger First Nations. That way we can continue to work on the 15%, but release all of the money to everybody. So that was my suggestion to the chair when she was talking to me. So if there's a way to word that way we can still try and accommodate larger and remotes as we move forward, but release all of the money based on the formula that exists. Is that something that would work for remotes? I see, Jason, you're kind of nodding a bit, depending on the wording, I think. So I just would need some assistance from the resolution committee to bring up that resolution. So there it is. There's the wording, Madam Chair.
Are the mover and seconder content with that amendment to the resolution? funding's been released. This is just to allow the Chiefs of Ontario to attempt to lobby for the missing 15. Fine? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so mover's fine, seconder? Fine, okay. Question's been called. All those in favor of this resolution? Any objections? Any abstentions? Abstention? Would you like your name recorded? Did Resolution Committee hear that? Okay, miigwech. This resolution is carried.
All right, thank you, Chiefs. I'd like to introduce our next presenter. I'd like to welcome Glenda Restool, the Director of Indigenous Learning and Child Care Secretariat, and just talking a little bit about the early learning child care program and funding. So, Glenda?
All right. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you to the elders, to chiefs, to Regional Chief Archibald, and to Chief Abram, as well as to Ruby, and to all the folks gathered here today. Thank you again for the invitation. Let me acknowledge that the land that we're on is the land of many nations, including the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and I'm pleased to be here today. My name is Glenda Restool, and I am a member of the Doquis First Nation here in Ontario. Before I move on, I'd also like to introduce some of my colleagues, federal representatives that I have here with me today. I have Marilyn Lumsden, who's a manager who works with me in the Indigenous Early Learning and Child Care Secretariat in Ottawa, or Gatineau, I really should say. Also with me is Pearlie Constant. Pearlie works with Service Canada here in Ontario and works actually on Indigenous programming such as the Indigenous Skills and Employment Program, and he's accompanying me here today. And we also have a colleague from Indigenous Services Canada, Shelley Knott-Fife. So thank you. So if we can move to the first slide. Oh, I have it. Oh, well, there we go. Okay. Ooh, the big green button. All right, here we go. You can hold it in your hand. Oh, I can? Oh. Here we go. Oh, it doesn't want to go. No, oh, this one. There we go. Okay. So if we, I want to look at the year in review about what happened in Indigenous early learning and childcare. So I'd like to reflect a little bit on the past year and on the accomplishments that were achieved despite some significant obstacles that we faced. I want to acknowledge that there still needs to be work done to flow the early learning and childcare funding to Ontario First Nations. And I'm here to let you know that I take this responsibility very seriously. And we want to continue to work with the Chiefs of Ontario and to move the implementation forward. And this is a priority for me in Ontario. So looking back over the last year, we've come a long way. The Indigenous leadership endorsed and released an Indigenous early learning and childcare framework in September of 2018. The framework sets the foundation to collaborate on achieving a shared path forward. But it took us a while to get there, but we did get there and we came together, and I think all parties felt that the efforts were well worth moving forward and creating a specific First Nations visionary blueprint that was co-developed with First Nations. Federally, we obtained our policy authority, and it was based or steeped in the framework, and it was also backed up with substantial investments. And these were also announced on September 17th. In that regard, a total of $1.7 billion has been allocated to Indigenous early learning and childcare over a 10-year period. Of that portfolio, 1.02 billion is earmarked for First Nations specific funding. Tremendous efforts were made by First Nations leading up to the National Chiefs Assembly resolution in December 2018. And at that assembly, decisions were made regarding an interim allocation that Employment and Social Development Canada was directed to use. And there was also direction for work to continue on a revised allocation process. So we faced a lot of challenges, and we faced challenging timelines following the resolution. Each of the regions understood that flowing the funds within 2018 and 19 by March would be, again, would present significant challenges to us. So First Nations and the federal departments involved, which include Employment and Social Development Canada, Indigenous Services Canada, and Public Health Agency of Canada, mobilized and worked hard together with the goal to recognize that the need is immediate. We wanted to make sure that as much money as possible got out to communities. Federally, we worked closely with First Nations regional coordination bodies, and in Ontario, that was the Chiefs of Ontario, to identify the best funding agreements and funding recipients to flow money based on dialogue with First Nations. We are now working on the year 2 implementation, and we want to do that in partnership. So as we look at this year, it was about identifying how we could work better collectively to ensure that our respective processes, so how we work together, First Nations as well as within the federal processes, that we work together better, more effectively and efficiently. So here in Ontario, there were many positives to draw on. There was the engagement report that came out. It was work that was done in 2017. And COO is the regional coordinating body. Again, worked very hard and brought forward some early resolutions for us to work with. And so we really appreciate all the work that was done. But unfortunately, this year, the Government of Canada ran out of time to be able to make those arrangements and get those agreements in place before March 31st. And we want to work better together in the future and to be able to get that money out the door. So ESDC has presented a strong business case for reprofiling of the 2018-19 funding into future years. Just want to be clear that it is the Department of Finance that is responsible for the reprofiling decisions. So I think it's worthwhile acknowledging that while we had a challenging year, that we are in a new world for all of us. It's a new process. We're working towards a 10-year transformative initiative with new investments, new ways of working together, and trying to get us to making sure that we get to that transferred Indigenous early learning and childcare system and building towards the transfer of early learning and childcare to First Nations. And I guess wrong button. So let's take a look at what transformation looks like. And I know that on your slides, the print's kind of small, but I understand that you have copies of the presentation. So I just want to take a quick look at where we were and where we're going. So we were moving from static funding. We had 3 streams of funding. They were the First Nations Inuit and Child Care Initiative, Aboriginal Head Start, and Aboriginal Head Start for urban and northern communities. And those were the 3 that we had. The funding was static. It hadn't changed for many, many years. We're now moving into huge investments being made into early learning and childcare, as I mentioned, $1.02 billion. We're also moving away from the program silos themselves. Those programs will still exist. They are still there, but we have a new program authorities that give us a lot more flexibility so that we can so that more can be done in communities. So we're not restricted by some of the program elements that may have limited ability in the past. And we're looking at increased investments and more flexibility. So we're really moving from from a static program to something that's far more flexible and will permit First Nations to be able to do a lot more in their communities on early learning and childcare. So going forward, we have the 1920 fiscal year, which started 2 weeks ago, and we want to be able to move forward for 2019. And there are a few things that we need to do, and that is to, again, work together, and we're looking for allocation decisions. How do communities want the funding allocated? So we're looking for that decision. There were decisions that were made for the previous year, and so from a federal perspective, we'll be looking at what those allocation decisions are and making sure that we'll be able to fulfill those. Also need for spending plans with regard to where the money will go. As I mentioned earlier, the work that was done previously in the last fiscal year, as well as the plans, from the engagement that took place in 2017 are really good foundations to be able to move forward with what can be done, and then how communities will be spending that money. And we want to make sure that there's a good fit. In other words, we want to be able to say, I guess the way we've been saying is, we don't want to ever have to say no, that something doesn't work. So we want to be able to work very closely with communities, with the Chiefs of Ontario, with the PTOs, to make sure that whatever communities want to do, that we make sure that those flexibilities are there so that those things can be undertaken for the children. And finally, we need to consider what funding mechanisms will be used in 2019, in fiscal year 1920. And there are different funding mechanisms that are out there, but we'll need decisions coming from communities to help us to be able to make sure that we get those funds in place. The other thing I want to do right now is acknowledge the Chiefs of Ontario and all the efforts that were made by the Chiefs of Ontario to coordinate, and the important role that they played on the National Expert Working Group. I guess I just can't stress how important it was. That National Expert Working Group did a lot of work leading up to the announcements and all the co-development work that happened prior to that, and the Chiefs of Ontario were part of that. And the last piece on there is about regional partnership tables. This is a key element of this initiative, and the government has asked us to set up these regional partnership tables. It's an opportunity for First Nations to work closely with other federal departments, because we have a lot of work to do. This transformative initiative is about transfer of this program to First Nations, and so we need to get ready for that. Will be work towards a co-developed results framework, data strategies, quality improvement, but basically, what are the steps to get us to transfer? And so these tables will be really important. They're being established across the country, and we want to be able to establish one in Ontario as well. And I want to take you to, there's a few slides in the back of your annexes. So the annexes are, there's 4 of them. So the first annex lays out and shows the federal funding in total. And as I say, I know it's really tiny on the screen, but if you take a look at your slide, you'll see the elements of that funding. So in there's service enhancement and expansion, partnerships and governance, transformative action fund that you'll see comes into play in 22-23, and as well as incremental increases to the funding. And so this is the full picture for First Nations funding. And these are the national totals. If you go to Annex B, Annex B lays out the resolution from the Special Chiefs Assembly of the Assembly of First Nations back in December. And you'll see there that Ontario, I guess I should move my slide, here we go, that Ontario is receiving 17.66% of the national allocation. And we've also summarized what was in the resolution. The third annex is a regional breakdown of existing federal funding. So I mentioned earlier that there are 3 programs that are already in existence. I'm sure most of you, or all of you, are familiar with them. There's the First Nations Inuit Child Care Initiative, also called FINICI, which is delivered through our ISET program, and ESDC's ISET program, and the Aboriginal Head Start. So you'll see them here. So this is existing funding. Another way that we refer to it is sort of a foundational funding. This funding will continue. There's $132 million that will continue to go out, and you'll see you'll see the Ontario totals. So $19.9 million will continue to flow under those 3 program lines. And so the new Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare is on top of that. So there's $19.9 million plus the Ontario allocation of $12.8 million. So it reflects the amount of money that's coming into Ontario for First Nations with regard to Indigenous early learning, or First Nations early learning and childcare. The final annex, which is Annex D, we wanted to bring this to your attention. This particular annex lays out what's referred to as the multilateral early learning and childcare framework. At the same time that we were working on a First Nations or an Indigenous early learning and childcare framework, the federal government was working on one for the rest of Canada. And so this reflects the money that is being allocated to provinces and territories for early learning and childcare. And so you'll see that, for example, in Ontario, in the upcoming fiscal year, Ontario will be spending $146 million. And so I just wanted to make sure that you had a full picture of all of the funding and investments that are coming into Ontario for early learning and childcare. So again, some are specific to First Nations, and others are the mainstream. And so I wanted to bring those to your attention. I know that we're short on time, so I kind of ran through it a little quickly. Thank you for your attention, miigwech, and I guess we're ready for questions. Oh, how does that work? Oh, hello, yes.
Hi, Chief Elaine Johnson, Serpent River First Nation. Doesn't look like much funding is actually coming to Ontario. And I guess it's an issue for my community. It has come up in regards to salaries. We're not paying appropriate salaries because we just don't have the funds. So I don't know if there has been any discussion at those tables in regards to, because I know in other parts of like NADAP and others, there's been talk about how do we raise the salary levels so that we can pay our people appropriately, because we really want people to be working in this field, we have to pay them appropriately. So there's not a lot of money, the way I see it in this, so I don't know if there's been any discussion about that.
Thank you. The new terms and conditions that have been developed for the Indigenous early learning and childcare have flexibilities in them so that any of this new funding can be used to supplement salaries. We have other regions in the country who are using their new Indigenous early learning and childcare to do that specifically. So those flexibilities exist within this program envelope. Mike 4?
Thank you, Gail, for your presentation. I heard this morning that I think it's $12.8 million was last year's funding. That
Yes.
you're asking for it to be reprofiled, finance might say no, and then the government will claw that money back. Is that right? Is that potential what could happen?
I mean, it's always, I'll say, a risk that it may not be reprofiled, but we believe that we've put together a very strong business case for that reprofile.
So what was the explanation given to in the submission why the money didn't roll out and flow out according to some formula? And why do we have money and there's no formula or thought of a formula on how that money's going to roll out to the communities? Why are we in this situation?
Why are you in this situation? What happened, as I mentioned earlier, is we ran out of time. Time became an issue, only because it's extremely difficult to amend agreements once we're heading into the end of the fiscal year. And so we were unable to process the agreements in time to be able to flow the money.
So whose responsibility is it to make sure that there's a formula in place to roll out the money that Parliament has allocated to your department for the benefit of First Nations people? Whose job is that? Is that the chief's job to put forward a formula, or is that internally in the government?
Do you mean the $12.8 million?
Yeah, because I was just surprised to hear that there was $12.8 million sitting there and no thought of a formula on how it's going to be allocated.
No, we worked with the Chiefs of Ontario. We had there was some work done by the Chiefs of Ontario.
So there is a formula then?
And maybe I can ask the Chiefs of Ontario to speak to the formula that was used. We didn't determine the formula. That's in the hands
of the Chiefs of
Ontario.
Okay.
Yes.
So what was the formula that was put forward to the government?
For the ELCC last year for 18-19?
The 12.8 million.
Yeah, the 12.8, there was a motion passed by the Political Confederacy for the OFNLP.
Okay, so then I guess why was it not honored?
They, as Glenda said, yeah.
It wasn't that it wasn't honored.
Well, the money didn't flow out, so it's still sitting there and maybe clawed back by finance. So,
yeah, we're, as I mentioned, we just ran out of time to be able to process agreements.
okay. Well, in future, if the chiefs put forward a formula, use it. Don't sit on the money because somebody disagrees with it. Because when we have an assembly and we vote on the resolutions, that's what we all go back to our communities expecting that's what's going to happen, and are quite surprised to learn that isn't what's happening.
And we want that to happen as well. We're looking at the 29, like this new fiscal year, and we're looking for that allocation decision so that we can move with this year's funding. We will be waiting for the decision with regard to the reprofile, and we want to make sure that there's a state of readiness in the event that those reprofiled monies become available.
So I would say that's the regional chief's job and Tracy Antone's job to make sure that the resolution by chiefs actually get implemented. So that resolution still stands and it's not been rescinded. Is that correct, Tracy?
For the 18-19, it was a PC resolution to use the OFNLP formula. We will be coming to you again
With another one.
with the same, well, I'm not sure, with a recommendation on the allocation. However, we put several different options before the government to get this resources out. There were, as they said, ran out of time because it meant amending agreements in late and early March. And there was some mechanisms that couldn't be done. Again, we put several options before the government to do it, and they ran out of time. We were prepared.
Well, what should have happened, I mean, hindsight is 2020, but what should have happened is the resolution of the chief should have been honored just to get the money out, and then we wouldn't have had this $12.8 million issue with finance. So I guess if this resolution didn't get passed today, this one that's being proposed, does the other one stand, or what are we don't have a mechanism to release the money? Again, we're in the same situation.
Well, the other resolution is still valid, but if there's no money, it's been reprofiled, then there's no use of it. So the new resolution also incorporates the possibility that that money will, from last year, will be reprofiled into this year. That was the request that was made. Also, that was backed up by letters from the regional chief, and also myself as a social portfolio to the Ministry of Finance, backing up that reprofiling and supporting that, so that funds will be carried into this year. So the resolution from this year will cover off, hopefully, the funds from last year and this year into one.
Okay, thank you. So when the resolution is passed, I'll be watching for the money to hit our bank account.
Yes. Yes.
And if it doesn't, I'll be making some noise.
Mike 3?
Victor Linklater, proxy for Tegwa Tagamau. Seeing it is social funding, can we have the same amendment to address remoteness added as the previous motion? Just quickly going through your material, and one of the things that concerned me is if we are moving towards nationhood, and my First Nation is running into problems when we access for certain funds, that it goes through PTOs and tribal councils. So if a First Nation has that capacity to do their own and apply for their own funding, I mean, I'm looking at the resolution and it kind of handcuffs us for what we want to do. I know it's not a lot of money, but, you know, for us to really move ahead and be self-reliant, I think that mechanism needs to be in place. And I'm not an independent First Nation. I do belong to a tribal council in NAN, but to me, I would still like that doorway open if our First Nation chose to apply for funding directly.
Okay. Maybe when we get to the resolution part, which will be right after that, then if you can think of a friendly amendment, and then we can propose it at that time.
I think the amendment that we used in our last one is fine with me.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, because I don't want money to be stuck there either, because
Right.
I think every First Nation needs money, you know.
Okay, all right. So we can add the same amendment that was added on to the last one. Okay, so if the resolutions table can put that in as well? Thank you. Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to address one point from the last speaker. The way this initiative is working is it's not based on an application base, and our department isn't controlling who can apply and who can't apply for the funding. One of the sort of, I'll say, keystones of this initiative is First Nations control over that funding. So the decisions about how the funding is allocated within Ontario is in your hands. The federal government is not here to decide, you know, which community gets the amount of money that it receives, whether you know, determinations are made that money will go directly to communities, whether you'll work through PTOs. Those are all decisions that are in your hands to make. And so we see it as an important opportunity as we move forward, you know, to be working at these regional tables so that we're aware of the decisions that you are making, and so that we can help to implement those decisions. And so that's what we're looking at. But those decisions as to how you want that money allocated are within your hands. Any other questions? We're done? Okay, all right. Oh. All right, thank you, Miigwech.
So you want this resolution dealt with now? Okay, so resolution 1419 on the screen, please. 2019-2020 Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Transformative Initiative Funding. The mover is Chief Abram Benedict. Is he in the room? Thank you. And Chief Marilyn Sinclair. There. Oh, okay, so mover and seconder are in the room. I will read the resolution clauses. Therefore, be it resolved that we, the Chiefs in Assembly, number one, direct Employment and Social Development Canada to immediately release and distribute 98% of Ontario Region's 2018-2019 Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Transformative Funding as previously directed. We're missing something here, comma, the political confederate. I think there's a word missing there. It says by the, so we're missing by. As previously directed, the Political Confederacy on February 6, 2019 via the Ontario First Nation Limited Partnership Funding Formula 50-40-10. 2, direct ESDC to distribute this funding according to the direction of the political territorial organizations, those are named, Independent First Nations, the unaffiliated First Nations. This direction will be conveyed via letter to ESDC following the passing of this resolution. 3, direct Employment and Social Development Canada to allocate the 2019-2020 Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Transformative Initiative funding in the amount of $12.8 million via the Ontario First Nations Limited Partnership Funding Formula 50-40-10. 4, the Chiefs of Ontario will continue its mandated, that doesn't make sense, will continue its mandate to coordinate and facilitate discussions with the PTOs, Independent First Nation and unaffiliated First Nations on future allocation process through A, coordination and facilitation of a discussion with First Nations representatives and representatives of the First Nation Inuit Child Care Initiative, Aboriginal Head Start on Reserve, the Aboriginal Head Start Urban and Northern Communities, programs to determine a regional distribution. B, delivery of a regional information session to inform early learning and childcare representatives on the new early learning and childcare framework, changes to regional funding allocations, and the terms and conditions of the FNI-CCI, AHSOR, and the AHSUNC programs. C, coordination and development of a technical relationship between ESDC and the Social Services Coordination Unit and other relevant sectors involving the ELCC. D, supporting technical and leadership tables to determine a regional allocation process. E, receiving and coordinating Ontario ELCC direction and reflecting this direction at the AFN National Task Team on ELCC to ensure the national distribution option for federal ELCC funds is reflective of Ontario Region's total population, service and programming needs, capital and infrastructure needs, remoteness and isolation. 5, direct the Chiefs of Ontario to conduct a comparable assessment to the 2005 Early Learning Asset Mapping Project of First Nations 2018-2019 Early Learning and Childcare Resources and Capacity. This must include a statistical analysis and comparison of children aged 0 to 6 listed under band lists, census data, and Health Canada data. And 6, Chiefs of Ontario to provide an update at the AFN National Task Team on ELCC and 2020 and 2021 Ontario Region's ELCC allegation at the Fall 2019 Special Chiefs Assembly. And then and 7, direct the Chiefs of Ontario to lobby an additional 15% for remote and larger communities, provided this does not impact the release of the current funding. That was a mouthful. Do the mover and seconder wish to speak to the resolution? No? Okay. Any discussion on the resolution? Microphone 4.
Chief Mel Hardy, Page Wabik Zagin, Nishnabek, Donji. Bonjour. I support this resolution as I worked in Toronto for a few years, and I ran the only Aboriginal early years. There's 25 of them in Toronto, or 24. The 23rd was a French, and the 24th was a First Nation. And one of the challenges I had was a recognition of, first of all, is getting the parents to come in and have a good understanding of, we talk about early learning and getting the parents to join as well. Which is also interesting for me was that I got a good chance as a worker on the front lines to be able to a good example of why we need these initiatives and why we need to also build capacity within our communities for our mothers and to learn some of these initiatives. But our workers, our staff, we got to build capacity in them to be able to make sure that these programs can run, because that's where we'll fail. So as the chief of a First Nation, I support this initiative because I'm actually a trained doula. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Because I was in a group and we had to do the doula training, I had to wear fake breast to learn about these latching and all this stuff like that. So and then I had to bring my daughter's doll every day. So I had to go through that, that whole importance of the connection with child and the mom. And then especially when it comes to early learning and learning about the early infants' language even, the vowels, whole 9 yards. And you put that into our language and the traditions of what we do. So I do support the, I do fully support this, only for the fact that we hope that there'll be a First Nation customs and traditions will be incorporated into that. Miigwech.
Thank you. Microphone 3, please.
Miigwech. Chief Leo Matatawaban, Fort Albany First Nation. Just want to remind chairs to respect rules and procedures of the assembly. So, and
Is there a point of order you're raising?
there was, I believe there was, I know that some people probably are in a rush to get home, but I believe there was a line there at the last page of the rules and policies and procedures there that maybe was a little too rush, I guess, might say. So anyways, but you already passed a resolution, so, and you're supposed to call 3 times for interveners or question or something like that, so. But anyways, I'm here for the early years, and the remoteness factor, and then, and as well as I respect the people that are addressing the cultural and traditional values that are been neglected, I guess, in the past, and we like to see that in the early years programming as well. So, but we do have competition, and we have to compete for teachers with other First Nations, and as well as the cost of living. The gasoline here is probably $1.25 or something like that, but up there is twice or 3 times the cost, and we do have to address the cost of living and attract our teachers to come up and work, and transportation is pretty high. Even with the hydro costs and the heat, that's pretty costly as well. And so we do have to accommodate our young people, the 0-6, plus the parents that are involved in this early years. They have to be involved in the programming, and we have to cater to their learning and provide that child relief programs so they can finish off their grade 12 education or college education, but not to take advantage of that program. So there's other costs that we have to provide to make sure that we have good teachers, good instructors, and if they don't have any of those certificates, then we have to bring in or provide them, make them go to school down south, or bring in instructors so they can be certified. Because it is a health and safety factor to all this, and sometimes our facility is not that big enough, so we have to extend it. So then we have to do studies on it as well, because we do have lots of youth, and it's like children having children. So we have a huge population, and these young people here, 0 to 6 years old. And then we have to, there's a lots of demand now with our growing community that we additional resources, not only in take care, but as well as this early years. So we have to address these remote factors, maybe that the southern communities don't understand, that what they have around them is lots of services and programs that they can tap into. But when you go up north, you'll be missing those services. So it's this constant struggle on the leadership to help out to address these issues. So it's just out of respect, and because I'm surprised that somebody is calling questions behind my back, and I'm looking around, you know. Think of.
Yes, we'll make sure that we call for discussion 3 times before we permit question to be called. Microphone 1.
Chief Wilfred King, Kias, Saugeen Anishinaabe, Gulbey First Nation. I want to raise a point of order as well, Madam Chair. As you recall, when we opened the Assembly, there was a vote on the rules of procedure, and I abstained for a reason. And the reason why I abstained is because we never followed the rules of procedure. You know, we adopt them, and it's the duty of the chairs is to ensure that the rules of procedure are followed. And I want to talk a bit about resolutions, and again, I want to take you to the rules of procedure on number 3 at the very end, where it talks about, it says that except in emergency circumstances to be ruled by the Speaker, all draft resolutions must be submitted to COO at least 14 days in advance of the first day of the Assembly. Draft resolutions that don't meet this requirement shall not be considered. Like, have the resolutions gone through that process?
As far as I'm aware, there were no resolutions presented to COO before the 14 days.
Okay, so then we're not following the rules of procedure then?
Strictly technically speaking, no, but Speaker does have discretion to allow resolutions in when
emergency
required.
circumstances.
And
Are
these
these all emergency circumstances resolutions?
And what I've been informed that there is time sensitivity for these resolutions, given the deadline for the funding and the fact that the writ's about to drop in June. So there's a window of opportunity
But
here
you
that must be
you didn't
seized.
address that, Madam Chair, when these resolutions are entertained. I'd like to know ahead of time if these were emergency resolutions. And if they are, just that, or dispense with the rules of procedure and say, we're not going to follow the rules of procedure. You know, or take that provision right out. Hopefully maybe the restructuring committee will look at this and say, let's take that provision out because we never follow the rules of procedure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. There's several sections of the rules of procedure that aren't followed. For instance, well, we won't get into that, but there are many sections of the rules of procedure that aren't routinely followed in these assemblies, and they become a matter of practice, and it's chair's discretion, and I'm exercising my discretion as chair to allow these resolutions to be brought forward today. And we do have quorum and we have business to conduct, so that's what we're doing. Is there any further discussion on this resolution? Question's been called. All those in favor of this resolution? Any objections? I see none. Any abstentions? I see one. Would you like your name recorded? Again. Miigwech. This resolution is carried.
So let's have a 10-minute break. Thank you very much, Chiefs. We're going to have a 10-minute break. We're expecting the minister to arrive shortly, so as soon as he gets here, we will entertain the minister. And shortly after that, after the minister is done, we'll be going into an in-camera session. So 10 minutes, and we'll wait the arrival of the minister.